You know, when we think about the British conquest of India, our minds usually jump straight to Bengal, right? To Plassey. But the real story, the first move in that grand, complicated chess game, actually started way earlier and much further south. We're talking about the Carnatic Wars, a series of conflicts that weren't just some local squabble. Oh no, this was a global power play that would decide the fate of the entire subcontinent.
And that right there is the absolute key to understanding all of this. What was happening in India wasn't just about India. It was a theater, an arena for a much, much bigger rivalry playing out across the globe between France and England. The battle for India was being fought on the fields of Europe, on the waves of the Atlantic, and of course, right there on the shores of the Carnatic coast.
So let's picture this chessboard, shall we? The once mighty Mughal empire was starting to crumble after Aurangzeb, leaving this huge power vacuum, especially in the south. You have these local rulers, the Nawabs, who are now technically independent, but also pretty vulnerable. And right into this chaotic scene step our two main players, the British and French East India companies. They looked at these Indian rulers and didn't just see kings, they saw pawns in their own great game for an empire.
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll set up this global chessboard. Then we'll walk through the three big rounds of the fight, from the first punch to the final knockout blow. After that, we'll get into the really interesting bit. Why did the British win? And finally, we'll see how they became the masters of India's destiny.
Okay, let's set the stage. The main arena for all this action was the Carnatic region, what we basically call modern Tamil Nadu today. Now, why there? It's simple, really. It had the richest trading ports and, crucially, it controlled the sea lanes. For two powers like Britain and France, whose entire strength was built on their navies, this coastline was the ultimate prize. All right, let's ring the bell for round one. This was the opening spar, you know? The first real test of strength. And at this point, it was less about conquering India and more about just landing a hit on your rival, wherever in the world you could find them.
And get this, the spark that lit this fire had absolutely nothing to do with India. A fight over who gets to be the ruler of Austria sets all of Europe on fire. And since Britain and France were, as usual, on opposite sides, their global rivalry just spilled over. A distant spark in Europe was about to start a massive fire in the Carnatic.
So this first war was actually pretty short. The French, led by their clever governor Dupleix, managed to score a big point by capturing the key British port of Madras. But then, just 2 years later, a peace treaty is signed way back in Europe, and as part of that deal, Madras gets handed right back to the British. So on the surface, it looks like a draw, right? A stalemate.
But here's the real takeaway. On paper, a draw. But in reality, everything had changed. The war showed everyone two things. First, just how weak the local Indian armies were against European military tactics, and second, how easily Indian rulers could be played against each other. For the ambitious French governor Dupleix, a light bulb went off. An idea was born, the dream of a full-blown European empire in India.
And that brings us to round two. This is where the whole game changes. The gloves are off. The Europeans are no longer just fighting each other directly. They start getting their hands dirty in local politics, turning Indian succession disputes into their own personal battlegrounds. The strategy was as simple as it was brilliant and devastating. Whenever a local ruler died in a place like Hyderabad or the Carnatic, there'd be a fight for the throne. The French would pick a side and back one guy. So what did the British do? They just backed the other guy. It turned into a classic proxy war, fought by Indian soldiers, paid for with Indian money, all to fulfill European ambitions. And at first, the French were winning, big time. It looked like their plan was working perfectly. But then comes the turning point, and it comes from the most unlikely of places, a young, hot-headed company clerk named Robert Clive. He pitches this insane idea, a surprise attack on Arcot, the enemy's capital. With just a tiny force, he takes the fort, and then holds it for 50 grueling days against a massive army. A true legend was born. I mean, the story is just incredible. During the siege, a massive thunderstorm hits. Anyone else would take cover. But Clive? No. He orders his men to keep firing their cannons, shouting this famous line. This act of pure, raw defiance just shattered the morale of the enemy army. They thought the British were being protected by the gods or something. They fled, and Clive became a hero overnight. Arcot wasn't just a battle, it was the turning point. It completely flipped the script of the war. Suddenly, British military prestige went through the roof. Their guy became the new Navan, the French were totally humiliated, and their brilliant governor Dupleix was called back to France in disgrace. Game changer. Now, after that disaster in the Second War, the French were on the ropes, but they weren't completely out of the fight. The final, decisive round was still to come, and guess what? Once again, it was triggered by a global war, this time the 7 Years' War, which some historians call the first real World War. This time, the British were not messing around. They delivered a crushing knockout blow at the Battle of Wandiwash in 1760, which basically shattered French military power in India for good. A year later, they even captured Pondicherry, the very heart of French India. It was a total collapse. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris, and the terms left no room for doubt. Sure, the French could keep their little trading posts, but, and this is a huge but, they were forbidden from building forts or having any soldiers. They were effectively declawed. The French dream of an Indian empire was over, finished. And this is the perfect way to think about it. The Battle of Plassey cemented British control over Bengal, the richest province. The Battle of Wandiwash did the exact same thing for the south. It marked the beginning of undisputed British supremacy. With their main European rival finally out of the picture, the path was clear for total domination. So, the big question is, why? Why did the British pull it off when the French failed? It wasn't just one battle or one hero. It really came down to some deep fundamental differences in how they were organized, how they strategized, and the support they had from back home. A huge piece of the puzzle is the companies themselves. Think of the British East India Company as a lean, mean, private startup. It was flexible, totally focused on profit, and its leaders on the ground could make big, bold decisions instantly. The French company, on the other hand, was basically a clunky government department. Slow, tangled in red tape, and every single important decision had to be approved all the way back in Paris. That one difference gave the British a massive edge. And that's not all. The British Royal Navy ruled the seas, which meant a constant flow of men and supplies could always reach India. The British government also saw the huge potential for profit and backed the company with loans and soldiers. And frankly, on the ground, leaders like Clive and Coote were just better generals, leading better trained, more disciplined troops. So let's just step back and look at the big picture. Over nearly 20 years and 3 brutal wars, the British East India Company went from being just one group of foreign traders among many to the undisputed European power in India. It's a staggering transformation. You can see the clear, logical progression. The First War dragged India onto the global chessboard. The Second War proved that the British were a military force to be reckoned with and a much better ally to have than the French. And the Third War? Well, that just swept their only real rival clean off the board. And why does all this matter so much? Because with the French threat completely neutralized in the south, the British could now pour all their resources, all their energy into capturing the biggest prize of all, the incredibly wealthy province of Bengal. The victory in the Carnatic wasn't the end of the story. It was the launch pad for the conquest of the entire subcontinent. From traders to masters, the British East India Company wasn't a group of merchants anymore. They were the masters of India's destiny. A private company had become an imperial power. And that leaves us with one final, very big question. With all their rivals gone and their power unchecked, what would this new British supremacy mean for the future of India?